Over will start. My name is Liz Riley, and I'm president of the Duarte Historical Society and Museum. And I do want to welcome you to the museum. We have an annual speaker series, and that's what you're attending right now. We have it every other month, more or less, depending on who wants to speak and what topics they have. But we try to have things of interest. So the museum, our mission is to preserve local history, educate the public, and provide history and nature-related programs to residents. And our museum is staffed totally by volunteers. So I do want to have a little commercial, of course. Membership in the museum is only $20 a year. So that's a real bargain, and we do appreciate if you would like to become members. It's the only funding we have is from the dues, and it helps us to do a lot of things, one of which we've just finished is the Route 66 room. So that we've taken a storeroom and taken everything out of the storeroom and have now made it into an exhibit, which is the Route 66 room, because after all, we are on Route 66. So we're very pleased with that. It's painted and new lighting and everything. So by all means, before you leave today, please be sure that to walk it and look around everything. Okay, we have a lot of very interesting exhibits. Couple of things. If we should have an emergency, this door is unlocked and open. You just have to push it open. And the bathrooms are through the doorway there to the right, and there's a door on the left, and that's where we are. So today, I'm very pleased. We have a local author, and to me, anybody that can write, I think is really, I mean, it's a gift. It's a talent to be able to do that, because you have to wordsmith. You're putting your words together in a way that is going to be meaningful, and somebody's going to read it and understand what it is you're trying to say. So our local author is Ann Bernath, and she will tell us about why she is always plotting.
Thank you. Is the mic working? We have video going. As she said, my name is Ann Bernath, and I'm very happy to be here. And I'm going to tell you about my writing life, because I have been writing for a long, long time, as you'll find out in just a minute. When my sister first said, come to the museum and give a talk, I'm going, well, what would I talk about? And how long what would I say? And then I realized, oh, I can talk about writing for a long time. So hopefully it'll be interesting. Before I go there, I'm holding, those are my 2 claims to fame, which are,
Yeah, sure.
Okay. At one point I will need it on because I'm going to be reading. So these are my 2 claims to fame. This book here, this is Inner Space and Outer Thoughts, is an anthology of speculative fiction by Caltech and JPL authors. And I work at JPL, which is Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I have 2 stories in this anthology. And when this came out, it inspired me to actually publish my own book, which is Rockstone Pebble right here, which is kind of a Western-ish adventure romance kind of book. So those are my 2 claims to fame. Oops, I lost my, there we go. Whoops. So I'm a Southern California girl. So I was born in Alhambra, grew up in El Monte, went to Rosemead High School, work at JPL in Pasadena. That's not a recent picture, but that's what's amazing about that picture is I've already been working at JPL a long time when that picture was taken. And then moved to Duarte in about 1981. And in fact, I lived just right up the street on Fish Canyon. So very, very close by. All right, so I'm going to start out by saying how this all started. And it started a long time ago, back when I was little, and I loved watching the Patty Duke Show, or anyone who might remember the Patty Duke Show. And there was an episode, and I actually found the episode, it's called Author. And I remember thinking, if Patty can write a book, I can too. So I started writing. Must have been 6 years old because that episode came out in 1964. So I said, look, Daddy, I'm writing a book. And he said, well, that's nice. You should use pen, though, because pencil will smudge. So I started writing in pen. But then at some point, I taught myself how to type on a Remington manual. I'm going to move this chair out of my way. I'm going to trip over it, you can tell. A Remington little manual typewriter, just like that. I used to sit on the floor, put my arms under my knees and type. I remember mother looking at me saying, how do you do that? Can't do that now. So I taught myself to type, so I never took a typing class. And I wrote my Westerns. I write Westerns back then, sitting on the floor, and I'd write about a couple pages, and then I would write what I thought was a cliffhanger on the bottom. I would try to get it on the bottom of the page, and I would hold it, before it fell out of the typewriter. Then I moved up. My mother bought me an electric. I was so excited. And I think it was from Montgomery Ward because it looked exactly like that. And this is back when the whole carriage return. Now when you're on your laptop, and my son used to laugh at me because I would say, hit return. And he says, Mom, there's nothing on this laptop that says return. I go, oh, okay. It says enter. But I remember the whole carriage return used to move, and pretty soon the whole machine would be moving across my desk. And it was very loud, very heavy. But I loved it because it was my electric typewriter. Then, I think this must have happened in the 80s or something, I got my Brother word processor. And I was so excited because you could write it, you could store it on a little floppy disk, you could print it. It was very cool. Once you got it scrolling, the text, it would scroll very slowly as it scrolled. But I used that, so I would get it scrolling and then I'd read along at its scrolling pace. And if something would stop me, like it got ahead of me, I would stop it and I go, okay, I must need to edit something here because it's not flowing. So that's how I use that feature of its slow scroll. So now I use, of course, a laptop 98% of the time. But if I'm sitting somewhere and I'm starting to think about sentences and I don't want to go grab my laptop and it's just a short little sentence or something, I grab my Kindle Scribe, which is right here, and so just write on it. And yes, it's better than paper because I can save it or erase it, or it's still digital. So those are my writing devices. So influences, come back. Okay, these are the books from early on. My mother had a set of hardcover Zane Grey books, so I started reading those. That's probably where I got my love of Westerns started. And then, like, the whole family was reading these Louis L'Amour Western books. I read all of those. My brother-in-law was reading sci-fi, and he would hand me these books by E.E. Doc Smith. So I read those. I was influenced by those. And later, I read The Princess Bride, long before the movie came out. And I was very excited when the movie came out. Oh my God. Because I loved fantasy and adventure and romance, etc. And this Stephen King book called Eyes of the Dragon, it really has very little to do with a dragon, surprisingly, but it's a fantasy. And I don't usually I haven't read many Stephen King books because I don't really like horror. But this is a fantasy, and I love this book. And I think The Princess Bride and The Eyes of the Dragon are the only two books I've ever reread, like read again. My husband rereads books all the time. I read them and then I'm done with them usually, but I reread those 2 books. And then I was a big TV fan, still am. I could have gone on and on and on about all the TV shows that I liked, but these are probably the big influences, you know, Lancer and Alias Smith and Jones are the Western TV shows that I loved. And of course, Star Trek, it's very influential. And then Battlestar Galactica, the original one. I know there's a new one, which is good, but this is the one I love. And I was looking at this picture this morning and I was thinking, oh, looks kind of like a trend, right? These pairs of friends or family members in that case. So what do I write about? You can probably guess by my influences. So it's no wonder then that I write Westerns. This is a Western. Western-ish, I should say. Fantasy, sci-fi, or anything supernatural. Anything that's too real world and contemporary, I'm not too interested in writing about. I like to have a romance because I love romance. And I like focusing on character relationships, and then with action and challenging circumstances, kind of as a setting or a backdrop or something they have to contend with. But I like the character relationships. So I have no agendas or commentary. I'm not trying to push any agenda or commenting on the world at large. I don't think, anyway, it might come through, but without me knowing it. But I really love exploring the different ways a story can be told. And we'll go into that a little more in a minute. Oops. So I just thought I'd go through writing through the decades. So you know that, in the 60s and 70s when I was a kid, I was just, writing by hand usually, but writing Westerns. And then in the 80s, when I got my word processor, that's when I started writing, like short stories. And I just found the other day a stack of poems that I wrote, just lots and lots of poems. But I am not a poet. I used to write them, but I'm not a poet. So I think it just was something fast that I could do that kind of kept me writing. And then in the 90s, it's a very prolific time for me. JPL had a writers club, and they would break off into little groups. They had the nonfiction group and a sci-fi fantasy group, and then they had just a fiction group, and I led the fiction group. So we would meet like at lunchtime every month or some cadence like that. And I would give out little writing assignments and let's write this kind of story. And so we just did some fun things like that. So I did a lot of writing during that time. And then I started writing a book called The Golden Rule, which is a sci-fi book that maybe I will get published that I will self-publish at some point. It's been hanging around a long time. So the 2010s, I was still working on The Golden Rule. Oh, I was working on a prequel sequel for a while. It's still unfinished. I don't know if I'll finish that, but it's still there in case I want to go back to it. But for several years, I wrote, every year for Christmas, I would write these, what I called the chronicles for my work group. And I would use all the people in my work group as characters in these stories. And then every year it would be kind of a different genre. So one year it was sci-fi, one year it was fantasy, one year it was Western, different. And so every year I would write this, and then we'd have a get together, and then I'd read the chronicles to them. And that was very, very fun. And they turned out to be really easy to write because I think I knew these people so well. So when they were characters, I would just know, of course, I would know how they looked and how they would act and what they might say and stuff like that. So that was fun. And then quite a few short stories during that time too. Then in the 2020s, this is when the TechLit is the Caltech Writing Club, and they put out a call for stories because they wanted to put this anthology together. And so I submitted 3 stories, and they accepted 2 of them. And one of them I wrote back in the 90s, and then the other one was more recent. So I went through a lot of revising and editing on those stories before they were published here. And then I wrote my Rockstone Pebble, and right now I'm writing its prequel, even though it's very different than this one, even though it's a prequel. And something I'm calling The Dragon King Invites You to Tea, which is on Kindle Vella, which is a place where you can post an episode or a chapter at a time, and people can follow you as you're writing it. So that's fun. So those things are happening at the same time. All right, so I've been writing since I was little. The Patty Duke Show inspired me. So my process, I was thinking about my process, and I thought I would come up with a flow chart. That's kind of the things you do at JPL. You're talking about a process. We call something a process, you think of a flow chart. And I started, putting out these steps and a flow chart, what led to what. And then I realized, well, I'm kind of all doing all of this all at the same time. There's nothing it's not as linear for me as one might think. For other authors, it could be quite linear, but not for me. So since I'm always plotting, I put that in the center of my circle here. But usually there's some kind of a spark or an idea, and I'll talk about the types of ideas that I have, or things that inspire a story. And then there's structuring, like how am I going to tell this story, and even structuring of each scene, how it's going to play out. Of course, the writing itself, and that's what Liz was saying, was kind of the wordsmithing, like, which words are we going to use to explain to describe this, that sort of thing. That's the fun thing. A little bit of researching, because I don't know a whole lot. So when it comes time to describe something, I go, well, what does that look like? Or what kinds of things exist? I have to look it up. I do some researching. Editing, lots and lots and lots of editing. In fact, this presentation has gone through quite a few iterations to do editing. That happens a lot. And then revising, I kind of separate these two, because editing is more of the editing of the words and the sentences, etc. And then the revising is like, okay, this should happen before that, and I shouldn't call that, or I should delete that part, or, the big kind of story revisions. I call that revising. And then maybe at some point you'll do, maybe you'll publish, and more editing will occur. Especially when it came to TechLit, they had editors. In fact, they had me put the story in a Google Drive, and then it seemed like I would edit it based on their comments, and then almost like that, right away I would look and they'd all new comments. I just put that. I just wrote that. So that was quite a process. I felt like a real author. I had an editor. So that's, quote unquote, my process. It's all going on all at the same time. So my spark. So people ask me, where do you get your ideas? And I think that's, people ask, authors that all the time. So one is like a premise or something that I decided I want to write about. And in the case of these 2 stories in the anthology, one of them is about the Cassini mission, because I was peripherally working with people that worked on the Cassini mission. So I wanted to write some kind of like tribute to them or whatever. So I wrote about the landing of the Huygens probe on Titan. It was a different little sci-fi slant to it. So it's a real landing, but a little sci-fi slant on it. And then I also wanted to write, I love time travel stories. So I said, well, how can I write a story that's kind of have a different take on time travel? So that was my other story in here is a time travel story. And of course, my work team chronicles that I talked about because I wanted to write something for the group with them as characters. And that was really fun. And then sometimes I hear dialogue in my head. And I hear dialogue. Oh, okay. Well, what does that mean? What kind of story is that? What kind of story could that be? And in the case of this story that's called Marker, I just started writing the dialogue and then writing the response from the other character. And then as I'm just focusing on the dialogue. And then at some point I said, why don't I just make the whole thing just dialogue? And that was very fun. Or sometimes I just picture an opening scene or an opening sentence. And that's how Rockstone Pebble started. So I had this kind of this opening scene in my head and some opening sentences and what I wanted to say. And I wrote about a half a page. And then I just, with some placeholders in it, I didn't know what kind of story it was going to be. But then I just set it aside for quite a while. I don't know how long. But at some point, I brought it back up again. Well, that might be fun to actually figure out what this story is about and write it. So that's how that started. And then sometimes it's just a title. So that's with the Dragon King invites you to tea. I thought that was a fun little title. And so I said, well, what kind of story could that be? That's where I started with that one. So that's the kinds of sparks that I have. And plotting, always plotting. So what is this story about and what's going to happen? That's basically your plot. And I usually get a general idea of what will happen, just general idea and maybe some beats along the way, but I never have a detailed outline. I think David Brin was the one, he's a sci-fi author, came to JPL to talk to our writers club, and he said that he has a very detailed outline. He knew exactly when everything was going to happen and what they were going to say, and that just sounded like, well, it didn't sound fun to me to have that detailed of an outline. I have some general character sketches. I figured who are my characters going to be kind of in general. But the fun part for me is when I'm actually writing about them and writing that dialogue and they're kind of speaking for themselves or doing things or reacting in certain ways. Like, so that's what this character is about. Okay. They kind of tell me who they are. But every night before I go to sleep, every night, I'm plotting. What will she say if it's revealed now? What does this place look like? Would this be a cool thing to happen? Why would it happen? Why would it matter? Would that be interesting? And then sometimes I make decisions, and then hopefully I'll remember them the next day. I usually do, but maybe not the next day, maybe a couple days later. Oh, yeah, I remember I decided this. So, but every night this goes on in my head. And then you have to do structuring before I probably can even start the book as a whole. How are you going to tell this story? And even the specific scenes, you have to decide how it's going to be told. Whether it's going to be, first of all, a point of view, whether it's going to be first person, Rockstone Pebbles, all first person. The two stories in there are, one's third person, the other one's kind of first person. Or is it going to be some kind of a mix? because that could be fun. You can have a first-person view and then maybe a third-person view. You could mix them. I don't usually write omniscient, which is like the, what is it, God cam, as they call it, or God view, where the narrator of the story knows everything. They know what this person's thinking, and they will know what that person's thinking, and they know everything. So I don't usually write omniscient view. And then whether it's a single character, Rockstone Pebble is single person point of view, the whole story. But usually my things have been from multiple characters. The prequel I'm writing now is single point of view, yeah. But in the past, I've written multiple points of view. So those kind of things have to decide. And whether it's going to be linear or, like it started here and then it went to there and you finish beginning to end, or are you going to frame it somehow? And The Princess Bride, if you've seen the movie or read the book, is framed because the grandfather is telling the grandson a story, and then the Princess Bride story is the story like within that framework. Could be both happening now and then maybe some flashbacks to then, back and forth. And then Eyes of the Dragon, what fascinates me about that story is that he would give like spoilers along the way. And then you would find out how that happened. So like at the very beginning of the book, you say, okay, here's this prince and his mother died when he was young and da-da-da. And you just, okay, that's the situation. But then as he's telling the story and you're kind of going back to when learning about him growing up and his relationship with his mother and everything, then that you're just knowing that whole time that she's going to die and it's going to be devastating. And you're more devastated that way. And I remember learning about the prince because something would happen. And says, but that's before he was locked up in the tower for the rest of his life. And so you wonder, oh no, what's going to happen? That was very different. And then the special case where I put the marker and all in dialogue. And I always use past tense. And my sister's been hearing me complain about this for several weeks now. It seems like every time I pick up a book and look at it, it's written in present tense, and it just drives me nuts. I go, why? What is the purpose? Present tense to me is either you're giving somebody instructions, do this, then do that, then do this. Or you're playing a D&D session where things are happening kind of real time. Anyway, I don't understand why this trend is happening with present tense. Anyway, but that's just me. Okay, actually getting to the writing now, the writing itself. And people have asked me, do you have a specific time set aside to write? Yeah. No. One thing, probably I'm not that disciplined to do that. And since I've been working full time until recently, that probably was hard to do, set aside the time. And since I wasn't writing for a living, it's probably another reason. But I don't really have a set aside time because I have to be ready. So the scene I'm going to write has to be ready in some fashion to go. So it's either by plotting, I should know what's going to happen at this point and what should be revealed or questioned or kind of what's going to happen, and structuring. Is it going to be a blow-by-blow description? This happened, she said that, he said that, or is it going to be more of a summary because we don't want to go through the whole blow-by-blow of certain traveling or something like that. You just want to summarize it. Are we on the go? Are we just reflecting back on things? So that needs to be decided. And do I have some dialogue ready? I usually like to, at night there when I was plotting, always have the dialogue. It's usually the first thing I think about is the dialogue that's going to happen. And then do I have an opening sentence ready to go? because I usually it's a kickstart of how I'm gonna get going writing. I don't write a lot in one sitting. So there's an annual thing that happens every year, obviously annual. It's called National Novel Writing Month, which is in November, where people are challenged to write 50,000 words during the month of November, which turns out to be like we'd have to write 4,000 something words a day or something like that. So I did it once, but I ended up writing a bunch of crap. So I can't just go, okay, write. Because I guess some people think that you just keep writing. Like, I can't do that. I got to write, and I got to edit, and I got to write, and I think, and edit. I'm not just a charge forward writer. So that didn't work for me. And I don't jump around. I guess people who have a detailed outline could jump around because they could write, I'm going to write this chapter. Oh, I'm going to write that chapter. So I can't jump around. It has to be linear. And the way I do it is I have to, like, when I sit and I have my opening sentence and I'm ready to go, and I just put my head in the space, imagine it, and then I go. That's the writing session. Oh my God, no. Sorry about that. Of all people, I should have turned my phone off. So editing, it happens at every step. And my analogy is it's like rolling out dough, because I have some dough I've written. The next time I sit down to write, I edit that out and then write a little more and then edit it and write a little more. That's kind of how I do it. So I'm editing as I write. The next time I write, I sit down and go, what did I write last time? Was that any good? Can I continue? Then after I print it, because as soon as I decide, oh, okay, I'm going to print it now. And then as soon as that hits the paper, just about, oh, okay. Things jump out at me. I go, oh, no. And I said, right, go back to the laptop. And also doing audio. My son and others like listening to my chapters as I write, after I write them. And it's a very good way to catch things, because when you read it out loud. Because, I'm stumbling all over this sentence. I can hardly get it out of my mouth. There must be something I should edit about this sentence. Or, I used this word 3 times in the same page. Or, that's not what I said. That's not his name. I gave him a different name before. Anyway, just hearing it out loud is useful for editing. And then sometimes I do a multi-chapter review. Like I get to a certain point, and then I say, okay, let me go back and reread the whole thing, reread up to this point to see if it flows, if it makes sense, if it hangs together, basically. So yeah, then when the whole thing is done, this is kind of a temporary, it's done. Okay, now I'll go back and start rereading it from the beginning. And I call that the great edit, because it's the whole thing that I'm reading and doing an edit. And there's several polish edits, and it's just editing. And then of course, when you're preparing for publication, with the Techlit anthology, I had the editor for my own book. My first run was sloppy, turned out, because I was too impatient. So I recommend, if you're doing this, take the option to get a proof copy. Look at that proof copy before you go ahead. But I have edited, I have updated it, and it is now good to go. Good copies now. Research. I put this Trail Drivers of Texas up here because when I was doing the chronicles for my team, and I was writing about trail drive, a cattle drive, I wanted to look up the details. I've seen it, I've read it in fiction books, and I've read it, and I've seen movies and stuff like that. But what really happened on these trail drives? So I think that's the most research I've done, is reading this Trail Drivers of Texas book, which had actually letters from the trail drivers from back then. But I also, Google is your friend. So at one point in my book, she was going to learn how to ride a horse. I go, well, how does one learn how to ride a horse? Because I don't ride a horse. So, I'm looking that up and figuring out how to, and then I just, of course, put it in my own words and put it in the story. What color are longhorns? I've always heard about longhorn cattle. I had to look them up to see what color they are, because I wanted to describe how they all looked across the landscape. And then anytime I have to remind myself to be specific, because you don't want to talk in generalities. Unlike Ernest Cline, who's made $1 gazillion on Ready Player One, but he's got stuff in there that's like, oh yeah, they were doing various 80s dance moves. Like, okay, well, what are those? Not very specific at all. So as I'm writing, maybe I'll write, okay, they tied him to a tree. And I go, well, it's a tree, but what kind of a tree? So I have to look up a tree. What kind of trees grow by a river? What do they look like? So I want to be specific so you can picture it. Otherwise, if it's too generic, it could be anything. It could be any kind of a tree. For horses, what kind of horses? I did a lot of learning about different types of horses and what they look like and what their parts are called. And, I've always heard about a roan, but what does a roan look like? I don't know. I had to look it up. So a lot of research. And then in Dragon King Invite You to Tea, I wrote, and this is really recent, I just wrote that this dragon was going to, catch a fish that jumped out of the lake. And I go, well, okay, what kind of a fish? What kinds of fish jump out of the water? So, I had to be a little more specific. And then, if you're going to talk about like adorned with wildflowers, another scene I was writing, I go, well, I can't just say that. What kinds were they? What colors were they? So I wanted to, it's richer and it's more immersive if you can be specific. So that's what I'm doing research. So what makes me happy? These are my happy pictures. Of course, in their corollaries is, if you look at the opposite of that, it probably makes me unhappy. So when I read over what I just wrote and I like it, oh, that's good. All right. And if I wrote it a long time ago and still like it, that's even more exciting. And when I realize a paragraph or section has survived intact through every edit, that's very exciting. Wow, that's the way I originally wrote it. And I still like it. We're going to have an example if we get that far, if you're still listening to me. When I need to just have a character that's going to kind of walk on, do something, because they need this to happen in the story and then walk off. But it's exciting when they refuse to just be a walk on, and I find that there's more to them than I originally thought, and maybe it would add a subplot or add something to the narrative. That's exciting to me. Or when a character surprises me with dialogue or some action I hadn't planned, but because I was writing along and I was writing from their point of view and it just popped out, and oh yes, that makes it more interesting. That's exciting. When I like all the decisions I make on the fly, which is a lot of them since I don't have a detailed outline. And when readers who aren't even friends or family members say, I love Rock, who's a character in Rock Stone Bevel. So that's very exciting. Of course, the corollaries are, if I don't like it, then I'm not happy. So now it's story time already. This is me with my granddaughter, who designed, well, she drew this picture of me, and I have adopted it as my logo. She even put my JPL badge on there. So I thought maybe might be interesting to look back at the original first paragraph that I wrote for Rockstone Pebble. As I had that spark and I was writing that paragraph, and then I set it aside for all that long time, and then compared to the final version. So I think I might need a light for this, but we'll see. So here's the original, and I've highlighted. Okay, that's fine. I'll just read out the screen. That's easy enough. Yeah, I'm not expecting you to read it. I'm going to read it to you. I've just highlighted some things see, I put it in brackets because I didn't even know what the story is going to be about or what kind of people I was going to be talking about or anything. So I just highlighted those things. So here's the original. It's going to be the opening sentence to Rockstone Pebble. I had always been the one who had proclaimed, usually quite loudly with my chin jutted forward, that I was not impressed with heroes, whoever they were going to be. Yet now here I stood directly in front of one, my jaw quite slack, my voice mute. It was one thing to know that a person was usually described as larger than life, but standing so close that you need to lift your entire head to meet their gaze was something different altogether. The hero, I didn't know what they were going to be, stood tall, carried broad, strong shoulders, and held his heavy weapons at the ready with ease. He was not particularly handsome, as far as I could tell from my low vantage point, but his eyes were a bright, piercing green. His interest in me was temporary and would be even less so if I continued to stand mute, for I could see his impatience growing with every heavy chest breath. So that's the original. Got put away. There was more to it, but we don't care about that. So here's the final opening paragraph. It's actually two. Hopefully you like the final one better than the first one. Just realized I'm going out on a limb here. Incredulously, my first thought upon lifting my head and staring into those ice blue eyes was how I had just the night before proclaimed to my friends, no doubt with my chin jutted forward, that I was not the least bit impressed by dusters. I gave them a name. Illustrious reputations such as theirs, equally feared and revered enigmas of the wildlands, larger than life, protectors of the innocent, were rarely lived up to, I had argued. Stories of their deeds, needing to pass from one excited tongue to the next, had surely been exaggerated. Not that any of it mattered, I had added. The chances that I would encounter dusters or require their services during my short coach ride across their territory were slim to none. Yet here I stood staring up at one, and I had been struck mute. So that's the difference between the two. Of course, this has a lot more of the knowing what the story is than this, because I didn't know what the story was. So it has a lot more detail about what the story has in it. So that's just a comparison. And that first paragraph had been through a lot of edits. So this is one of the example of paragraphs that survived every edit. I remember the night after I wrote them, I posted them on our Slack channel at work and said, hey, these are some paragraphs I wrote last night. And I got some really good feedback. This one person said, oh my God, I have to know what happens. So, I have to go over here. Sorry. This is sort of in the middle. Well, it's kind of in the part. I don't know. It's far along in the book, but the gift wasn't heavy, and I could feel the shape of a small box underneath the neckerchief that served as its wrapping. Up until now, I had avoided contemplating its contents, but I couldn't help but speculate to some degree. The box might contain something I had admired at the marketplace. Jewelry, perhaps, although I wondered if Rock would really give me something so significant as a parting gift. It was very possible that the gift could just be the box itself, for I'd seen some lovely hand-carved boxes at the marketplace, some lined with velvet. Had I gazed at those boxes admiringly? I couldn't remember. But Rock said it was something that would remind me of our time together, so the box must contain something, maybe from both Rock and Stone, or something personal of theirs, although I couldn't imagine what. Dusters seemed to only carry necessities for the job and their survival. But I didn't need to continue to wonder. All I needed to do to find out was open it. I ran my fingers over the knot formed by the tied corners of the neckerchief, then set the gift on my nightstand where I could see it when I went to sleep and when I woke up each morning. The unopened gift kept my time in the wildlands, my time with Rock and Stone, in suspension. Opening it would start the clock again. There would come a time, I felt certain, when I would open it, but it wouldn't be tonight. That's what I posted, and somebody on the writing channel said, I've never wanted to know what was in a gift so much. So those have survived. And then I just thought I'd talk about writing the last chapter I've written from The Dragon King Invites You to Tea, where this dragon here, whose name is Annalise, receives an invitation to this tea. And so what did I know when I started going in? Well, I knew her name from chapter 6, because I gave her a name in chapter 6. I knew she was a white dragon, and I knew she would be a marriage candidate for Volred, our main character, the Dragon King. And Volred doesn't think she likes him very much. That's all. And I knew I had some plans for her later, but very in general. But what I hadn't decided until I wrote from her point of view was her personality. I didn't know anything about her personality. I would have to find out by writing from her point of view. I didn't know what other characters would be in her world, because I'd be writing from where she was and what she was doing. I didn't know what her thoughts and desires were going to be. This was, and her real feelings about Volred. I did decide as I wrote, but I didn't disclose them. So that's what I knew and didn't know before I went in to write it. So this is my last little thing, so you don't have to worry too much. So this is just kind of the first part of this chapter about Annalise. Annalise spread her wings and plopped her belly down on her favorite flat outcropping of rock, allowing her limbs to dangle over each side. Jutting out of the south side of the mountain peak, the rock remained free of snow most of the year and absorbed the warmth of the sun during the summer. She sighed a relaxing sigh, soaking in the sunshine and the warmth from the heated granite beneath her. This was her special, private spot. No one could see her from the base of the mountain, and she doubted any dragon had a reason to fly this high. Routine patrols required flying closer to the ground, and flights between coverts were low and direct. Here she could be alone, no fussing attendants or royal guards. Here she had the time to breathe and appreciate the rugged beauty of her father's northern slice of the Dragonlands from an undisturbed vantage point. Annalise. The voice was faint but unmistakable. Mikkel, her father's second, was calling to her telepathically. She sighed a different type of sigh. Annalise, return now. Your father is calling for you. Could she claim she had been too far away from the royal covert for Mikkel to reach her? A breeze ruffled the snow-white mane along her spine. Even in summer, one could still feel a chill in the air when it blew across the snow-topped mountain peaks. And although she had lived her entire life in the north, she wondered if she might not be happier in warmer climes, such as Bismarck's kingdom in the south. The western kingdoms would be warmer, but would put her too far away from home and family. So she discounted them. She could also consider Volred's eastern kingdom, even though the thought engendered a simultaneous shudder and a nervous flutter in her stomach. Of course, a pure white dragon would stand out in any of those regions, but then again, a princess never went unnoticed. So that's the beginning of that chapter. where I'm learning about her and how she feels about things and her life and this Mikkel guy that didn't even exist until I started writing the chapter. So that's kind of story time. And that's where we come to the end. Did I miss something? Yes, I did. What am I plotting now? You might be asking. I'm writing the prequel to Rockstone Pebble, even though it's it feels like it's a different genre, really, but it is a prequel, and its current name is The Guide to Palace. You never know if the title will survive, and I'm about halfway through, I think. The Dragon King Invites You to Tea is about a third of the way along, so I'm writing those simultaneously. You know, as long as this one's, I'm right to have a flow in this one, and I go for a while, and then I get to a point where I say, okay, I need to really plot some more before I can continue, and then I kind of switch over to the other. And then currently brewing in my head, because I'm always plotting, I've had a request from somebody who read one of my stories in the anthology, When You Were Not Jenny, the time travel one, and he said to me, that's a great story, but now what happens? I go, what? But that was the story. He said, yeah, but now what happens? So I go, okay, well, maybe I can write a follow-up to that. So that's been brewing, as yet titled. It's untitled. I started a little page or two of sci-fi short story about a living storm, and I gave it a name, Crackles. But it's just sitting there. Hopefully I'll resurrect it when I plot some more about that one. And then I'm thinking about, even though my friends that I wrote the chronicles for, they've all gone off to different projects, and sometimes even left JPL, and they're kind of scattered, but we're still kind of in touch. And wouldn't it be fun to write another chronicles, except this time, and I didn't tell you my big influences that are happening now, which is we're all into anime and manga. So I'm kind of inspired to write story in this for them for the chronicles, based on the story from one of these animes that we've been watching, the anime series. So all these kind of things are, they're on the back burner. And that's it. That's my writer's story. I'm going to be giving a short version of this because they're only giving me like 20 minutes at the Monrovia Rotary Club on July 9th. I just got my book into the Flint Ridge bookstore in La Cañada bookstore, La Cañada Flint Ridge bookstore, and they're going to have an author event on July 14th where people will ask questions, we'll do a little readings, book signings, that sort of thing. And then anytime you're on Amazon, you can search for my name and you'll get Rockstone Pebble, and you might also get the Dragon King. It's available on Kindle Bella, so sometimes it comes up and sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know when maybe if you have a recent posting, maybe it comes up in search. Anyway, read along at read@annbernath.com. I've got books up here. I've got pens. I've got business cards. So enjoy the snacks, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have a question.
Yes.
When you originally wrote Rockstone Pebble, did you know that was going to be the title?
That was my placeholder title.
It was different.
No, it was always Rockstone Pebble.
Always
I didn't know it was going to stick. I go, well, I'll just call it Rockstone Pebble for now, and then that's a good enough title. So I just, that's
let's give her another hand. I think it was to be able to write is really a gift. I mean, and be able to, like you're saying, you're writing 2 or 3 things at one time, to compartmentalize that. I mean, that must be really tough because you're having to like you said, the structure's got to go, and then it's all different in each of them.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But that, I guess it's just, I don't know, makes it more fun, I guess.
Are there any questions? All right, well, thank you so much. And yes, please, we have refreshments and I hope you all stay, wander around the museum, buy some books. Hey, everything's good, right? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.